Good morning, everyone. This is Hardware Management Project Overview Talk, which is the beginning of System and Hardware Management track. A series of talks are planned in this track. I'm Hamel, architect at Broadcom, as well as co-lead of Hardware Management Project in OCP. I prepared this material jointly with other co-lead of Hardware Management Project, Jugeshwar. I'll be going over this presentation in next 15 minutes. So for agenda, what we'll do is initially I'll introduce the goals of OCP Hardware Management projects, what's within the scope. We'll go over the project overview, and then we'll talk about the sub-projects and conclude the talk with how you can participate and contribute to the OCP Hardware Management project. So to begin with, system management and hardware management of OCP platform and in general of data center and cloud infrastructure has become very important. It has always been one of the critical aspect of the data center management. So hardware management project is focused on that aspect of it. The goal here, to summarize, is drive interoperable common manageability for OCP platform, and which includes the specification, the reference architecture, and providing a common foundation for other OCP projects. So the way this project is defined today, within the scope of the project, to begin with, we have all the standardization of manageability interfaces, which includes within the box as well as outside of the box. And a set of requirements, baseboard management controller, typically this is the trusted management component on a platform. And the project is focused on specifying the requirement and have interoperable standard for communication from BMC to other component, as well as communication with the BMC. And it's really important that you define the specification. So along with that goes the whole interoperability, as well as the project wants to make sure we have conformance program, which allows somebody to validate an implementation against this specification. In addition to that, we want to provide guidance and feedback to other open compute projects so that we can have a common manageability across all the OCP projects. We have OCP profiles repository, which is primarily containing the management profiles, Redfish base generated by OCP hardware management project, as well as a sub-project, as well as other OCP project. So this project, one of the aspects of this is to oversee the development of OCP profile. And then at the end, I'll go over a couple of sub-projects where one is the rack management controller, and the other one is hardware fault management, defining standard way to manage racks, as well as have the communication between the RMC to BMC and the system firmware. That is what that sub-project is focused on. And the hardware fault management is standardizing common behavior in the case of handling of hardware errors. And this is the sub-project that is under consideration right now. So that gives you an overview of the scope of OCP hardware management project. It has been producing specs, and on the next slide, these are already published spec. We have published the baseline and server OCP Redfish profile. So this provides the foundation for other projects to build their profiles on top of that. From the OpenRMC sub-project, there are 3 specifications already published: the northbound API spec, as well as the profile that goes along with it. We also have a design requirement specification from OpenRMC that is publish. And recently we published Run BMC specification. What this does is it provides a hardware level specification to have a standard reference platform for BMC implementation, as well as standardize the interfaces between BMC and other components within the system for manageability. So as you can see, the project has already published a number of spec and continue to work on adding more management related specification, reference architecture, and design. One of the sub-project which has been actively publishing specs, including profiles and the design guidelines, is OpenRMC. So what this is on the right, if you look at the slide, within the box you have your baseboard management controller, your firmware, which is your system level firmware running on the host CPUs. And then you have this rack management controller, which is running its own firmware that is managing all the systems across or within the rack. And OpenRMC sub-project basically looks at both the northbound API, how a client can talk to this rack management controller. It is standardizing that interface based on Redfish standard, which is a REST-based API specification and interface specification published by DMTF. OCP works very closely with DMTF. And then also Redfish is been used for communication between RMC and BMC. That is also part of OpenRMC project. So this sub-project is basically focused on that, specifying the northbound interface and profile. For more detail on this project, we have another session, OpenRMC overview and update. Make sure you attend to get more details on that. Moving on to the second sub-project proposal, the hardware fault management. Recently, we had significant discussion in the OCP hardware management project on we should standardize the system behavior under hardware failures. So today, there's no one common standard, and then every platform and every hardware failure reporting, failure management has been very fragmented in a way that there is no one common way of reporting hardware failure and or managing hardware fault domain. So that's what the focus of this sub-project proposal is to define key baseline requirements for managing hardware error, as well as provide reference architecture guidance on system hardware failure management. And this is increasingly becoming important as systems are getting more complex and managing hardware faults, hardware errors, pretty much demands to have one interoperable standard so that it can be managed in a cost-effective way. So as I mentioned before, this project proposal is under discussion. We are gauging community interest on this. I would strongly recommend you to also attend this couple of sessions that are listed here, where it provides an overview of the sub-project, as well as there is specific session on cloud scale hardware fault diagnostic that you should attend. So in summary, I went over OCP hardware management project overview. Its scope is basically defining common manageability requirement across OCP platforms, making sure we have reference designs and reference architecture for common manageability standard. It is focused on system level firmware, BMC, and hardware management. So I strongly encourage you to submit your proposal, contribute to OCP hardware management specific specifications. Also submit your reference architecture and products compliant to this specification. And we really welcome participation in the hardware management project as well as the sub-projects. There are weekly calls that these projects are holding, but you don't have to just go to the calls. You can also contribute to the reflector as well as attend the calls. And as you can see here, there are a number of references that you can follow and get more information about OCP hardware management project. With that, I would like to conclude my talk here. Thanks everyone for listening. And at this point, we'll open it up for questions and answers.
See one question that was posted on the chat. The first question was about what is the plan for code base for OpenRMC. So if you go on the wiki for OpenRMC, you will see code contributions from several companies, including Inspur, Intel, and Microsoft. And we welcome that type of contribution. There is a follow-on question to that, OpenBMC, which is related to OpenBMC. The question was, I'm wondering, like OpenBMC, when will we have common code for OpenRMC? That is a really good question. That is something that needs to be worked with OpenBMC, as OpenBMC is adopting a number of standards and specification. This may be also an area where it can extend by having a reference implementation. So that makes sense for either a joint project or aligning that with OpenBMC reference implementation. If there are any other questions, please feel free to post them on chat. I'm going to be here for next couple of minutes. There are we have the whole track on hardware management and system management, which goes from, this is the beginning of it, goes till the noon Pacific. So encourage everybody to attend other presentation after this. There was another question on the chat, which, how do we get the presentation? The presentations will, after this talk, they should all go online, so you can download them on demand and review it. They should also get published on the OCP site. Another question here I'm seeing, it says, do you envision OCP systems and hardware management getting into manageability details between the subsystem, NIC, accelerator, and BMC? Yes, I do see that. That is within the scope of OCP hardware management specification. Our focus so far has been on the external facing interfaces, but these are kind of internal interfaces for communication between the components of management subsystem. And that also falls within the charter of hardware management. We also work very closely with TMTF, which defines a number of standards around that, which includes MCTP, PLDM, and NCSI. And we had, I think a year or 2 years ago, we had a presentation from this OCP project, how we can leverage those. Another question here I see, and this will be the last one, and then we'll drop off. This one says, now we have 3 contributions. Are we planning to have common code base? That will be a good discussion to have in the OpenRMC subproject. And there's one more question here which says, is there any activity to map the hardware failures? There is a hardware failure management subproject. That's where it's being handled. Regarding the last question, is there a mandatory minimum that all servers should support that OCP recommends? That is, there's a baseline spec. Different OCP projects are defining their own profile specification. So there are a number of projects adding to what hardware management project has done is define the baseline profile spec, which specifies the requirement as well as the baseline server profile specification. Okay, with that, I think let's conclude the presentation here. And those who are planning to attend other hardware management track presentation, you should continue with this track. Thanks everyone for participating.